Hey guys, in this channel I have already shared some stories like how Compile and Idea Factory started, and some games left and right. But now I wanna share some of their best games. However, keep in mind that most of these entries are quite underrated for X, Y, Z reasons. In my case, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I don't mind fanservice or peculiar ideas, as soon as the stories or gameplay are decent. So also consider that there will be some peculiar entries. But without further ado and no particular order, let's begin with Hyperdimension Neptunia U, Action Unleashed. Oftentimes it is said that the main Neptunia games are the best, but I have to disagree to a certain extent. While the story is a bit trivial and probably just entertaining for those who know references about consoles or companies like Sony, Nintendo and so on, here we have a Musou game, or Warriors-like. If this game feels like a Senran Kagura game, it is because it was developed by Tamsoft and Compile Hard. Whatever the case, in this spin-off you can select some classic characters and jump into fights where you need to beat waves of enemies, by using different kind of combos. Needless to say that there is a fair share of fan service in between if you take some damage, which also reduces your stats. As other mechanics, you can increase your ETC drive as you advance and use special skills to deal huge chunks of damage. What is cool about this game is that despite its simplicity, it is entertaining to play, and there are no frame drops, which was something surprising. In our next stop we can find Generations of Chaos, Pandora's Reflection. There are multiple entries from the Generations of Chaos, but this game doesn't require any particular introduction. Here we follow Claude and Yuri, where Yuri has a curse that leads our duo to travel around this barren world. However, down the line, they get into messy situations that pretty much can decide the fate of the world. It is an entertaining story for the most part, good chunks of text left and right. As for its gameplay, it is a strategic RPG with some basic systems, where you use AP to cure your characters, level up, and well, everything in this game works with that AP. As for the combats, once you reach an enemy position, depending from your character's weapon, you need to press some buttons at a different pace. Some weapons are kinda easy to get, while others have weird tempos, which turns quite dynamic, and that dynamic feeling can also be extrapolated to its gameplay, because you need to think in offense and defense at the same time, as the CPUs oftentimes goes after your base, or sometimes they gang on your characters. This game is quite entertaining. Next, we can find Fairy Fencer, Advent Dark Force. In this story we follow Fang, character that oftentimes gets into trouble for dumb choices, so for the most part I will say that this one swings into the dumb and funny moments. That down the line, depending from the route you choose, it takes unserious approaches. Gameplay wise, we explore relatively simple areas in search of furies, and once in combat we are thrown into these small areas where position is key to deal as much damage as possible, but also keep your allies out of harm. However, down the line, there are enemies that can beat the heck out of you with ease. In my opinion, it has a balanced difficulty, unless you are going for the true ending, which requires a second round, and it can be finished quite fast. Perhaps what can be a bit tiring is that you will see the same places a good chunk of time, because of the concept that is used in its narrative. As for Refrain Court, it has a completely different approach, turning into a strategic RPG. It is relatively simple, but also I will say quite entertaining for the most part, and also continuation from Advent Dark Force. In the next spot we can find Sakura Wars, So Long My Love. Worth mentioning that the original devs were Sega and Red Entertainment. Later, Idea Factory worked on the Wii port, where this game combination sounds quite alien, but it works, because it is like a dating sim and a strategic RPG at the same time. In the story, most interactions have different choices, accompanied with specific inputs or let's say minigames added in between, something out of a visual novel. They are quite entertaining to go around, and also they affect in the long run because it is through these interactions that you get extra bonuses. However, some people might get stressed out as they have timed inputs and different paths through the journey. I will say just go with the flow. Other people may get turned off, as it takes quite a time before jumping into battles. Its gameplay, while strategic, it doesn't use grids to move around. In a sense, it is similar to Fairy Fencer, where you need to keep in mind this action bar that shows the number of actions you have at hand. And as I explained from the visual novel part, some outcomes depend from the different relationships between characters. If everyone gets along, everything will go smoothly, but if they don't, it may turn a bit complicated at some points. This game is a quite interesting mix, but not for everyone. Then we have Mary Skelter. Some of you already know my opinion about this story. I really like it, but there are different things that made that raise some eyebrows. In any case, here it depends which entry you decide to play. In my eyes, all of them are good. I would recommend to play them in order, and that is with Mary Skelter 2, Nightmares and Finale. Now here if you ask me something like, okay, I wanna give them a try, which one do you recommend? That is kinda hard because Mary Skelter 2 has the best story. I loved Nightmares for its challenges, and Finale because of its creative way to play. However, this entry is something I cannot recommend for those who aren't into the RPGs, because dungeons are overwhelming, and also because you need to manage 3 different parties. So I will say play Mary Skelter 2, and from there decide if it is for you or not. Just avoid the Steam version, it has some issues. As shown multiple times in this channel, this is a DRPG where you gather allies as you advance, and every Blood Maiden has particular roles and classes, whereas you unlock skills, you can combine them to whatever class you prefer. However, in combat it is important to pay attention to their stress levels, which is accumulated by receiving damage and also dealing attacks that splash blood. If you don't pay attention here, they enter into Blood Skelter, and it is up to the Lord to decide if your team or the enemy will make it out alive. In the next entry we have Dragon Star Barnier. Word of advice, avoid the Switch version, it has some bugs. I have explained them a couple of times. Now here we follow Sephi in an adventure where he ends up finding that he's a witch, event that turns his existence head over heels, as his original objective was to hunt dragons and witches, so he's unable to return with his comrades, and of course every witch is wary of him. So as the story progresses, depending from your actions, you can become friends with them or turn into something much more obscure. So yep, there are multiple endings. Its gameplay is all about moving around different areas. For the most part, they are simple, but once we initiate combat, this is where its unique battle system comes into play. Depending from your position, every character can get hurt, but the same goes around. If enemies are within attack's range, you can deal damage to most of them. However, and ideally, you don't want to beat them with normal attacks, because you can devour them and that way you can acquire unique skills that can be equipped to use your characters in specific ways. This system turns boss battles into a lot of fun, because you need to check the damage to decide when it is a good idea to devour them. And there are some enemies that have amazing skills, but they are a bit tricky to get. Let's follow with Record of Agarest War, found on Steam as Agarest Generations of War. This is another game that has a good story, but it takes a bit of time to reach the best moments. Whatever the case, I will say that each generation has a nice cast of characters, where depending on who you marry, the next hero will have different attributes, skills and stuff like that. And also depending from your choices, the story or some events change, so I would suggest check a guide if you want to get the true ending. In this strategic RPG, you wanna pay close attention to the characters you use, as they have different extended areas, which also affect the battles in a lot of ways, as you need to combine different skills to execute the best attacks. And ideally, despite changing positions, you want your characters to link once again to continue your combos again and again. This is particularly important against bosses, otherwise plenty of them can be frustrating. So yeah, this is a quite complex strategic RPG that takes a good chunk of time to finish, and as you reach the end, the difficulty gets higher and higher, where if you struggle to visualize how to combo enemies and some grinding sessions in between, yep, most likely this one is going to be thrown out of the window because it's unforgiving. For the next game or group of games, Genka Toki are quite questionable entries, so I don't recommend these games to everyone unless you can take a game for what it is or if you like these peculiar executions. While there are many in the series, I haven't played all of them, so Moero Crystal or Chronicles are the ones I would recommend, but it depends if you want to play a short but laughable story or better interactions with monster girls, but much longer gameplay. Personally, I recommend Moero Crystal Age, because I consider the interaction between characters something much more meaningful in these particular games. In any case, both the stories are entertaining. These entries in particular are the RPGs, so you need to traverse some simple dungeons where you can find different monster girls, which are the boss fights. Some are really tough to take down as they tend to buff, combined with area of effect attacks and multiple characters can say bye bye in one turn. So do not underestimate this game, it can be hard in some moments. In any case, once you tear their clothes, you can get into this minigame, where you need to rob 3 specific parts, so you can free them, and of course add them to your group. In basic terms, it is like a kind of Pokemon. Next we have Dead End Request. So far we have 2 entries on this side of the lake. Probably later we can receive Goal C, and in the future the 3rd entry. I will say that the first game is the best one as it has a much better story, but the second game polished mechanics much more, so I have a bit of a divided opinion here. In any case, for the most part we follow Arata Mizunashi, programmer who finds way later that his coworker Shina, who disappeared 1 year ago, is trapped inside of a game, where later down the line they find lots of weird things about the world they live in. Gameplay wise, we move around different areas, where we can find all sorts of things, even dead ends by getting into places that we shouldn't. But that is part of the main idea of this entry, so be prepared to see some unexpected endings, where once you initiate combat, you're thrown into these open areas where ideally you want to make enemies bounce against each other as well as your allies, to deal good chunks of damage. Worth mentioning that the fights in the first game feel quite different, as enemies are a bit heavy to move, so a good chunk of times you need to get really close to make them bounce. For the most part, I would say they are quite entertaining. And in our last stop, we can find Mega Dimension Neptunia Victory 2. As far as gameplay goes, this is one of the best Neptunia games, where in this story we follow Nep, who found a forgotten and damaged console. Later she asked Nepgear to fix it, and once that is done, Eve absorbs both characters. For the most part, you know that there will be lots of references and dumb moments regarding the console wars, so the more you know about those topics, the more fun you will have within its narrative. Worth mentioning that you need to finish the game twice and crack your head a bit in the second round to get the true ending. Gameplay wise, we move around different places and enter into dungeons to conquer them, where the game is separated into 3 arcs. Once inside, you can find enemies roaming around, where you can attack them before initiating combat or get surprised. Its combat mechanics are similar as the ones we saw in Fairy Fencer for those who are not acquainted with this franchise, with similar mechanics as Etzel Drive, the HDD forms or Goddess and stuff like that. Worth mentioning that this entry is a bit grindy. If you don't take the time to level up a bit, bosses will beat the heck out of you in one turn. And some other bosses are a bit gimmicky, but nothing that turns into an impossible task. And with this, I hope you found this video informative. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.